Hello and welcome to It's All Kicking Off, another football roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilbourn, Ewan Paterson, and Simon Gallagher from What Culture Football to discuss another burning football issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to What Culture Football on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily football podcasts. But gents, we are gathered here today to discuss which Premier League manager should be fired. Now, there are quite a few obvious names that spring to mind when you talk about this. It is sort of getting into that season, isn't it? We've already seen Watford.
Squeaky bum time.
Indeed, sack Javi Gracia. He was the first to go. But now there is talk of course, Marco Silva from Everton, Maurizio Pochettino from Tottenham, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Who do you want to start with?
I've got a problem with this now because
He wants them all to be sacked.
Well, no, I've got to try and just not have any sort of smug sense of self just exude itself through either the audio for our listeners or through the visual metaphor. And I think there's with Watford kicking the whole thing off. That's kind of that's typical of them, isn't it? We've seen for the past few years they just kind of without really rhyme or reason, even though it has paid dividends in the past, they kind of just sack their managers at the first sign of trouble, and somehow it's worked for them. It happened the other year with Marco Silva, obviously the whole Everton saga with that, and then you had Javi Gracia coming in, and they brought back Quique Sanchez Flores, and it's really worked for them. But obviously Watford aren't any of these clubs, and some of these managers have had a much longer time to kind of fashion projects. And then a lot of the clubs we're talking about today, they're all projects, they're all works in progress, especially for Everton and Manchester United, and Spurs as well. Is weird because you think that Spurs being a project for the past few years, and you thought, well, the Champions League final, that should be where the Spurs project really, even though they didn't win, they should crack on and try and give it
Yeah,
another
they
go
kick
next
on
year.
from that, exactly.
And it seems as though that might have been the end of the story for the Pochettino project. The project? The project. And
Projectino.
That's a worry for Spurs, because I think maybe more so out of them or Manchester United, or even Everton with the ambitions that they have, I think potentially they might be in the most trouble. That's mainly just down to the fact I see that a lot of that squad being broken apart in the next few months, especially going into January. There was talk that Pochettino wants to sell Eriksen, Rose, and Serge Aurier as well. So there's a big restructure going on there, and that is a concern halfway through the season, I think. Whereas with Manchester United, even though you have the team itself probably isn't up to standard, there is still, it's all just a shambles, isn't it, really? I'm looking at all of them, and I think they're all just appalling. Everton's kind of typical because it's Everton, and every single year it's like they win the summer transfer window.
Supposedly.
By spending, 35 million on Alex Iwobi? And it just hasn't paid off, and they're now in the relegation zone in Manchester United.
Imagine my surprise.
Yeah, so I don't know who would you say is like the most in trouble out of all of those?
I'd say, despite the fact, like you say, that Man United are 12th, Tottenham 9th, on this horrible run of form that stretches back to last season in the league.
Yeah.
I'd say Marco Silva out of everyone, because when you spend that sort of money, and we were all looking, especially because, to talk about fantasy football for a split second, we all put loads of Everton players in our fantasy football sides at the start of the season because they, alongside Bournemouth, had arguably the easiest start, the easiest sort of 6 or so games. And like you say, after 8, they find themselves 18th, having lost their last 4 games and not looking like they could buy a win anywhere.
Which is ironic because that's their approach to.
Well, the thing is, I think they've allocated their funds in a really bizarre way. You'd think that after Lukaku left, they'd want to invest in a really competent striker, but after he left, I think they got Cenk Tosun. And they've tried experimenting with Richarlison down as a striker, not as a winger, and they've invested hundreds of millions of pounds in attacking midfielders and wingers. You got Walcott, you got Iwobi, you got Bernard, and then when obviously Idrissa Gueye left in the summer, they replaced him.
Who's been a sensation, by the way.
They replaced him with Gambin, and I think that player's injured now, and they haven't adequately addressed that either. They could have gone out and gotten someone like a Ndidi from Leicester or a Decore from Watford, and they haven't, and that is a major issue. I think if your manager is being backed in that way, but they're splashing all the cash in the same areas, which they're already well stocked in, by the way, that's peculiar, and I think questions need to be asked in that regard because Everton have a talented group of players. Luca Digne, a very competent left back, Seamus Coleman, again a very reliable right back as well, and you just look at that team and you think, well, every single year they're chalked up to be competent, but it's just a shambles. And as someone who's from Liverpool, even though I don't like Everton, I still want them to do well. I don't want them to get relegated. So
I don't.
Yeah,
it's interesting because the reason why we're talking about it today is not only because we're in the midst of this international break and this, God, I hate talking about international football during this sort of time period, but also because the sooner you sack people now, not that I'm suggesting that you should, the more time they've got to adjust to the squad and realise where the holes are ahead of the January transfer window, which is, yes, traditionally an area where they don't actually invest that much money in. But you've mentioned already these sides that are already looking to and probably should invest in this squad. And with that, I want to talk about Man United and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So, what do you think? Do you think he should be given time? Because the opinion amongst pundits seems to be rather divided about him.
Yeah, I mean, it's right to talk about the Man U project rather than a team at the minute because obviously I watched the game on Sunday. And
who did they play
I was
again?
worried about being smug. Here we go.
and they were just absolutely terrible. Like, their big hopes. Scott McTominay is, I mean, you can see he's a very talented player.
Front cover of Pro Evolution Soccer.
Yeah, but he cheated all over the pitch on Sunday. Yeah, which that's not what we're here to talk about. But don't do that, Scott. It's not very nice. They don't have any of the Man U spirit that you would expect. So they're relying on players in the wrong places who just aren't good enough to be playing for a team that you would imagine to be like Man U.
It strikes me that they've, looking at it, and I heard Gary Neville talking about this the other day, they've got the bones of a sort of team that you can see going forward, and arguably players that, shouldn't be the most relied upon, but would add elements to that. You've got Tuanzebe, you've got Maguire, you've got James, you've got Rashford, you've got McTominay, like you've mentioned there. With the sprinkling of Pogba's and a few other, and De Gea, obviously, if he can recover this form. But
he had no chance for the goal. Like he didn't.
It's a great finish.
It was.
But yeah, but then again, I look at that squad, and as much as we were talking about this before you came in here, and you said, well, he sold Lukaku, so some of the blame does have to go to Solskjaer. He does kind of feel like he's been handed a bit of a duff hand. Like it's not the way he's playing them. The squad is just crap.
Well, he played them wrong against Newcastle, but then Steve Bruce, for all he's maligned, he played an absolute blinder tactically just by putting 5 men at the back, 4 in midfield, and just stop Man U from having any space
because
whatsoever.
They have no midfield.
Exactly.
They played Fred and Pereira in that mid. Was it a midfield 3 they went with?
Yeah.
They played Fred and Pereira in that midfield 3, and Fred has been shocking. They paid £52 million for him, and he couldn't even control like a simple pass. And it's just, you look at that and you think, well, they need a good spine. I think was Pogba injured that? No, he was. Yeah,
he didn't play.
I can't remember. Yeah, and you think about it. Well, Pogba's probably on his way out. You think he probably has eyes for Real Madrid at the moment in time. Fred was meant to be kind of they apparently sniped him under City's nose, but he's not come good.
Just like Sanchez.
Yeah, and like for all they can kind of vaunt their talent with Greenwood and Rashford and Heath Chong and everyone else coming through the ranks, it's not enough. And I think one of the things we touched upon before the season got started was talking about how Man United needed to kind of find their spirit. Talk about how you need players who want to play for the shirt because it is a prestigious club. And you think that signings like Daniel James and Aaron Wan-Bissaka would probably solve that problem. But is there too much pressure being put on their shoulders? I think Gary Neville raised the point last weekend that, Rashford hasn't really gotten any rest since being kind of thrust on the side. Martial's been injured, obviously. And Rashford is a talented player, but is he necessarily ready to lead the front line for Manchester United?
He's only, 22?
Yeah, he's not like a 30-goal-a-season striker. And I feel as though that's naivete, maybe from Solskjaer, for, putting all his eggs into the youthful basket, as it were. But then you also have to think about it, well, what alternatives does he have? And, if the board's not going to back him where he wants to go, that's the thing as well. But Man United, let's face it, they've spent over like 300 million quid in like the past few years. This is a squad assembled that's very, very expensive. And it's just mismanaged from top to bottom, and that's the unique thing with Manchester United. I feel as though whereas some of these other clubs, you could probably pin down the problems to disquiet in the dressing room and the managers themselves, it's kind of rotten from top to bottom, and that in itself you could probably change a manager, but until things change on a more in-depth level, how much genuine change are you going to get?
I did find it funny though that a manager of Manchester United was there saying, we did have quite a few injuries though.
I know, yeah, and against Newcastle as well.
Yeah.
It's like we had the two Longstaff brothers playing centre midfield. Like you wouldn't 2 seasons ago, people didn't know that name at all. It's quite funny. At the start of the season, we talked about our expectations of things, and we said that the Man U project was one that you have to give them time, and in a couple of years, it's probably going to be a really good team if they stick with those players. But the problem they've got now is that if they do stick with what they're doing now, they're going to come absolutely nowhere in the league, and it doesn't matter for the next couple of years in any Man U fans' eyes or in any of the board, because you still have to have a look at one eye on where you finish in the league. So they're going to do what everybody probably expects them to do, and they'll fire Ole Gunnar Solskjaer eventually. 4 more games like this, and they will do it.
The conversation's already been initiated.
Exactly, yeah. And then
Dreaded
in January,
vote of confidence.
I mean, he plays Liverpool next, so I'm just saying.
Well, that's going to be 5-6-0 if they play like they did on Sunday. And then in January, they'll go out and they'll buy 2 or 3 short-term players who just, all they're going to do is derail what they're trying to do with the younger players. But at the same time, they still need that. Like, they need a Laurent Blanc to come in and just steady the younger players.
Well, it's interesting because we mentioned Mandzukic earlier on before we came on. He's been constantly linked to kind of signing for Manchester United. And also in the press this morning, I think Allegri, who used to manage Juventus, has been linked with the job as well. And he's issued some sort of ultimatum that says Man United have got to sack Solskjaer by December, otherwise I'm not coming. And you would think that maybe, if you're thinking particularly cynically about this, you think maybe the links with Mandzukic are down to the fact that Allegri, is familiar with the player at Juventus and could get the best out of him at United. It's not good, is it? And to me, I can't have sympathy, but I can, empathise in the sense that as a Liverpool fan, only 8 years ago, we were kind of in a similar position with Roy Hodgson, and they're kind of in the banter era, as it were, where nothing's going properly. You're signing the wrong players. The club's identity is kind of at odds with, some apathetic owners who don't necessarily buy into the whole idea of the club. And I can't tell whether if sacking Solskjaer, because I don't think Solskjaer is good enough for Manchester United, but at the same time, it's one of those things,
where'd you go other than him?
Yeah, that's my point. So I could definitely see Allegri helping, but at the same time, it's like, well, at the end of the day, I don't think Solskjaer is good enough either.
So should they fire Solskjaer?
It depends what they want in the long term. I think to be honest, yes. Based on what I saw on Sunday, he's not the right manager for the job, and everything around that as well.
I mean, if I have any influence with the Manchester United board, I will say don't sack Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Ollie's at the wheel in that. But objectively speaking, I don't think. You think of managers being given plenty of time to work on something, and you think of that form they went on after, he got appointed on a temporary basis. I think Man United got lured in with some sense of nostalgia and were just like, okay, well, let's give him the keys. And if he's going to restore the belief and fighting spirit back into this club, let him lead the way for the next year or on a permanent basis, whatever. And I think that was emblematic of the short-term thinking under the club under Ed Woodward. So,
we were just talking about Sunderland to talk about a very much not Premier League team and their managerial position, and how Kevin Phillips is linked as their favourite to be in charge next. And I think it's not a bad idea, because he's the kind of person who'll come in and regardless of ability in the squad, he'll inspire something. That's clearly what Man U have thought they were doing with Solskjaer, but even then, I don't think he's a legend in the same sort of way as some of the others who could have come in, like Frank Lampard at Chelsea, for instance. And I think they need somebody arguably even more like that. What they need is somebody like the spirit of Matt Busby to come and inspire these players and make them play above and beyond what they seem to be capable of at the minute. Like, they need a Kevin Keegan at Newcastle situation.
For me, I'd keep Solskjaer because I think
Oh, same.
You're not going to... Well, I don't think they're going to win anything anyway this season.
No.
So they may as well treat it properly as a season of transition. Give him January, give him finances. And at the end of the day, if you're Man United, even if he spends it in the wrong areas, which they have done time and time and time again, there's always going to be more money there to spend it in the summer. So give him till February, March time. And if things aren't turning around then you make the change.
Yes.
And then you give the new manager, rather than sacking them in the summer, you give them the end of the season to sort of get a gauge of what, where players are within the squad, and then you can change them. But let's move on, because there was another man who was linked with the Man United job just a few months ago, and now finds himself potentially being fired from Tottenham Hotspur. Maurizio Pochettino. The problems at Tottenham have really sort of reared their heads post that, because everyone got a little bit distracted with the Champions League final, that their league form really dropped off, and you could excuse it because you said you had one eye on that. But since the Premier League has restarted, they've been dreadful.
The thing is as well about this, and I know I've kind of talked about the disquiet within the Spurs squad. You have Eriksen without having eyes for Real Madrid. You have people going into the last years of their contracts like Rose and Vertonghen and Alderweireld. I think Pochettino's team selections have been truly bizarre this season as well. I have no idea why he's not been playing Lucas Moura after the form he was in at the end of last season. He's been going with fellow Argentinian Eric Lamela, who is a competent enough player, but I don't think he's as good as Lucas Moura.
Good off the bench.
And I think
Flat has to deceive him, because sometimes he can have the game of his life and then others he's just sleepwalks
But
through
you
games.
think like a front line of Kane, Son, and Moura, that kind of pretty much chooses itself in a way. But I think the thing with Spurs is like it's somehow they've gone from the project nearing completion to then going back into a period of immense transition again, and it's because
is that lack of investment, or
I don't necessarily. I mean, last year obviously you can talk about how they didn't crack on in the summer transfer window, and you think they probably stalled, and that allowed other squads to bypass them. But they went out and got Ndombele here. He's one of the most vaunted talents in French football, and he's a great player. And you think of what they needed in central midfield. They lost Dembele. Winks is a competent player, but he looks out of his depth on occasion because he's still a young player coming through. Dyer's not in the picture anymore, and you think, well, Ndombele, that could be a fantastic signing for them. But I look at Spurs and I look at Pochettino. He looks almost clueless what he's doing right now. I have no idea what's going on with those team selections. He can't sit on the back three, he can't sit on the back four. What's going on with the midfield? And it's very peculiar to me. And yeah,
the thing that's most peculiar to me about Spurs is that the overvaluation of Moussa Sissoko. I just don't. I think he's emblematic of the entire situation, because I just don't see it myself. Haven't seen him at Newcastle, but also since he's been there, he's very industrious. He'll take the ball a lot, like up the pitch a lot, but like he's not worth a new contract. He's just got for me anyway, and I just think they're looking at sort of strengthening around the wrong players like him. I think you're right about Harry Winks. I don't think he's quite there yet. I don't think I've seen anything from him that suggests that he is really. I think because he's English, people are like, well, he's the next coming of Frank Lampard. But it's interesting about Spurs because sort of a season and a half ago, well, just about a season ago, all of these players who are a little bit older, you're looking at them and thinking they've got loads of experience. It's going to do them well for the end of the season and the Champions League final. You look at them now and you're like, well, they're old and they're over the hill.
Is there an argument to be made that, because Mauricio Pochettino is not a bad manager, he's one of the best managers in Europe, arguably, considering what he managed to do with Tottenham last season. Is there an argument that he's kind of taken them as far as he can? Like, I'm sure he could do better things at other bigger clubs. He's taken them as far as he can, and you need a fresh set of eyes, like you say, with these players at Tottenham.
I would say so. I think part of the issue with it is, as well, a lot of these players probably had an opportunity to leave in the past few years, Harry Kane being one of them. And they were all told, stay here, we'll do something. And then they've got to the Champions League final, and that is their opportunity to do something, and it hasn't happened.
I think the players have probably looked at that and gone, well, that was such a miraculous run towards the end. We got past, Man City and Ajax by the scrape of our teeth almost, and now we've gotten to where we're kind of playing above our ability to actually get to that last game. And then obviously anyone who's linked with Real Madrid is probably going to change, their opinions about the club that they're at. Christian Eriksen in that particular case, and then you look at someone like Dele Alli. He's just dropped off a cliff the past few months, and it's interesting to me because it's such a rapid decline. Like, again, you think of the Spurs team, like you say, a season ago, and I can't tell whether that's down to the fact that Pochettino hasn't been back necessarily. They didn't strengthen last season. They talk about the aspirations of the Champions League, and then you think of maybe, are they all fatigued? I think there was a stat that came out after they played Brighton, and you only have to look at that game and see that none of the players were pressing. And you think of Spurs under Pochettino for their first few years, it was like one of the best pressing teams in the country.
They didn't against Newcastle either.
They don't have any energy, and that's unfortunate when they don't have any creativity to back that up either.
Before we move on, let's talk about Tottenham's form. Last 5 games, drawn 1, lost 1, lost. That awful result against Bayern Munich, of course, in the Champions League as well.
Yes.
Is there an argument to be made that I think they should get rid of Maurizio Pochettino, to be perfectly honest. Is there an argument to be made that if you do get rid of him sooner rather than later, you can possibly retain the players, or will getting rid of him mean that Eriksen and Kane either door,
I mean,
etc.?
there's a problem at Spurs in that because Pochettino wasn't given any money, there were battle lines drawn, rightly or wrongly, by the media and by fans that suggested that Pochettino and the squad were one group, and then the club is another group. So then you have to think about whether that is actually the case, and maybe Pochettino is too close to the players emotionally, let's say, because if they're struggling, they're exhausted, and they possibly need a kick up the backside, is he that type of manager to do that when he's been the one that's been protecting them and saying, this is our project, we have to keep this core together for so long? And probably not. But then equally, if you get rid of him, he's too close to the players, and they'll go, well, you've got rid of my pal. What am I going to do now?
And he'll say, I'm off to Real or wherever.
Exactly. I'll go wherever he goes if he gets a...
That's the interesting thing as well, because you think, the Spurs project is Pochettino. Like, you think of that, you think, he's the guy that really galvanized that squad. If he goes, even though they're currently in a period of decline, like you said, the players will look at that and go, well, I was here to play for Maurizio Pochettino. I was here to make something out of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. And then, if he leaves, then that kind of, because I don't think necessarily that, like you said, maybe there is a delineation to be made here in players playing for Pochettino and players who are playing for Spurs.
Get rid of Pochettino, yes or no?
I'm going to say no for this season. I'll probably wait until the end of the season.
I think yes, and I think what you said about Man U wait till March, knowing they're probably going to get rid of Solskjaer anyway. Bring in Pochettino, get Harry Kane in the summer. Man U come 4th next season.
Marco Silva, we didn't say yes or no for him. I think he has to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Get Big Sam back.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Everton, they're stacking a bonfire the way they're going about this. It's been 3 transfer windows on the bounce where they've spent hundreds of millions of quid. And they've got a new stadium they're building as well on the Albert Dock. And it's like, well, where is this money going? Like, you think of Silva as he was ludicrously backed after what he did at Hull and Watford. He didn't have the most amazing record at either club. And yet he came in and was just suddenly heralded as like this new Mourinho type figure that could like build an entire project. And fair play, it's good to see a club backing a manager. But when he's asking for his 6th winger, you kind of got to ask yourself, well, what? Like, what is going on? And I think it makes sense then to change it. It's same old Everton in the sense, another year where the manager's been backed in the summer and they've not delivered on the promise. But again, at the same time, that if it's a project not worth investing in, you shouldn't just keep it, even when it's, if it's rotting in your corner of your living room with like disgusting crap on it and everything. So I'd say get rid of Silva.
Get rid of him?
I'm just thinking the Everton fans are going to pick up on that, on the Liverpool fans saying about them. I would say, yeah. I mean, they don't have much option. And personally, as a Newcastle fan, I want him to get fired because he is the very antithesis of what Mike Ashley wants to do at Newcastle. He is proving Mike Ashley's point in a way because he's going out and buying all these players and they're absolutely nowhere and they're currently below Newcastle.
Yeah.
And then Mike Ashley's like, why should I spend any money when look at them languishing down there?
Let's run through a couple of others. You very quickly wanted to mention Steve Bruce.
I did, yeah. Up until Sunday at like 5:30, Steve Bruce would have been top of my list of people who probably should get fired because he was clueless. And then he pulled off a tactical master stroke and he can now have the keys to the city. For until next game when we get
Yeah, because the problem you have with this time of year as well is you're now 16th.
Yes.
But you could easily drop to 19th.
Yes.
Or you could leap up again to...
Which we were.
No backsies, Wilbourn. He said it now.
Okay.
No
Yeah.
If you were, would you want Steve Bruce to be in charge still? No.
I mean,
I suppose the difficulty is that you don't know who
else there
would.
is?
Yeah,
yeah,
else would
exactly.
take
I mean,
that
like,
job.
what alternative do you have at that point? I think you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I wouldn't have gone and appointed him in the summer if that's the question being asked.
The newly promoted sides are always interesting. I think Sheffield United, doesn't matter what happens to them, they will not sack their manager because they realise what sort of side they are. And you look at the other sides, Villa are doing obviously reasonably well, mid 15th, I should say. And speaking to their fans, that I don't think there's any rumblings of discontent. Norwich are a different kettle of fish. Obviously, they've got that amazing result against Manchester City. They've lost us 3 games after that. They're 19th. They're conceding goals left, right, and centre. They got battered by Villa at the weekend. Daniel Farke.
Yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you want to try and stay in the Premier League, but you also kind of want to stick with the person who got you there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing there is that I think the Villa result could be decisive in this because that was at home when Norwich should really be showing their football. And I think the unfortunate thing for Farke at the moment is that he's had so many injuries in the squad. I think that's definitely kind of curtailed Norwich's ambitions at this current moment in time. I think he should be given time because obviously what he did in the Championship last season and also that display against City kind of speaks for itself as well, and it's kind of commendable that they've retained their own identity. I just think that maybe the worry there is that they're going to have to do some business in January because they've had so much bad luck with injuries.
It always strikes me with these promoted sides, someone like Norwich, if you stick with him, even if you go down 20th in the Premier League, if you keep playing that football again the subsequent season in the Championship with not only the players that got you promoted, but a few more flair players that you've managed to buy in with the Premier League money, you could do a sort of Burnley where you bounce up and down and slowly evolve that side, or do you think they are going to be slightly more trigger happy at Norwich?
My prediction at the start of the season, I believe, was that they would stick them and Sheffield United. I thought actually would stick to their playing style in the Championship, and then as soon as it didn't work after a little while, they'd go out in January and buy cloggers to fill spaces. People who had Premier League experience on the CV, but had amounted to absolutely nothing, basically. I mean, that's cruel, but that's probably what's going to happen.
What back in the day used to be like a Nigel Quaggi signing.
Exactly, yeah. Is he still knocking about?
Probably.
Yes.
Get him in.
Exactly. There's a problem for Norwich in that I have put 2 of their players in my fantasy football team.
Let me guess, Cantwell and Pookie.
Yes, roughly 3 weeks ago, and then they lost every game since then. So I apologise. Don't sack him, sack me.
Okay. Final one, Pep Guardiola.
Oh, get him out. Oh, gone. Nah.
I only talk about that.
You can do better.
Not in terms of sacking, obviously, but the interesting thing I read today was he said if he can't recover results for Man City, which is ridiculous to be saying something like that. I mean, they've been phenomenal for the last few seasons, and it was outrageous how well they had to play so that Liverpool didn't win the league last season. He has said, though, if he cannot recover results, he's going to walk away from Manchester City. And we always knew that he was not going to be there for 5 more seasons, for example, which is the hope most Liverpool fans were clinging to. But it's interesting because it's not just the Laporte injury; they've kind of lost their way a little bit. Not to be too hyperbolic.
Having spent 200 million on fullbacks as well, it's I mean, I have no sympathy. Like, it's just a case of like, if Guardiola will probably turn this, they'll probably go on another ridiculous run of form towards the end of the season. Anyway, people saying that the title's done in October are just having a laugh. I don't know. Personally, I'd love it if Pep just went elsewhere. Maybe go.
Imagine following that as well as a manager.
There's only one person who can, and he is currently Liverpool's manager. He's got nothing to do.
I have no idea. I think it makes sense for Guardiola to move on after maybe he finds it too tricky. I don't know.
I sense that at the end of this season there may be change at Man City. What do you think?
I would think so. I think his statement about needing to change around results and walking away is quite clever, actually. It's sort of like, I mean, it doesn't go as far as a Winston Churchill will fight them on the beaches in terms of a speech, but it's making himself a martyr. If it doesn't go well, then he walks away and the team's protected. But if it does, Pep Guardiola is even more of a legend than he already is for them.
I've not heard a single Man City fan, by the way, saying that they should get rid of him or he should leave.
No, I don't think they ever would. It depends. I mean, if Liverpool open up a bigger gap, which I would hate to see, I don't like any of it. It's fine. I'm a Newcastle fan. I'm just bitter. Then maybe they'll turn on them a little bit more because we all love Liverpool fans, but they're not going to take it very calmly or subtly towards Man City fans, are they? And that'll start to grind on them, let's say.
Well, let us know your thoughts in the comment section on who should be the next managerial casualty. And make sure you join us tomorrow. Make sure you join us tomorrow for our roundtable. Have Liverpool already won the league? So you can let us know your thoughts
Featuring
in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And you can send us Twitter questions at WhatCultureFC. Watch there. Follow all three of us. You can follow Ewan at
Ewan ruins things.
You can follow Si at
Simon Gallagher.
You can follow me at Adam Wilbourn. As said, follow us all at WhatCultureFC. This has been It's All Kicking Off. My thanks to Ewan and to Si. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.